Hello everyone, my name is Russell Huff, and I'm making this video in response to Tim WalkingBear Goodblood's recent blog on YouTube titled My Star and Dan Rant. I was originally going to post this in the form of comments on Tim's video, but I got a little carried away, as you can see from the length of this video. So instead I'm going to read what I was originally going to post off my computer to make it easier. I am one of Star's children from her ex-husband, and I recently spent 6 months living with both Star and Tim. I was planning a move to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when I went to visit my mother. This was during the time period after the house they were living in had sold. Tim was at the time incarcerated, while Star and the children were living on the property of a friend. During the time that I stayed with them, I learned that Star had been unhappy in their relationship for over a year. But that when she mentioned this, her thoughts were cast aside. She was fearful Tim would carry through with his threat to take Nico and head out west were she to pursue ending their relationship. She did, however, decide that it was finally time and that she would make changes while Tim was away. She spoke with counselors and tried to find the best way to proceed for her, her children, as well as Tim. Do not mistake what I say. I have no delusions that my mother is perfect. We've had our disagreements over the years. For the record, Tim has never, to the best of my knowledge, said anything negative to or about me. He has actually been completely respectful, that is, aside from trying to bring me into their arguments. This is not meant to degrade either party, though it will likely seem that that is the case. I am, of course, biased being one of Star's children. But I will do my best to keep my personal feelings out of this video. Let me start off by saying that Star and Dan were in no way having an affair. Hell, they barely spoke. I was at Harry Brown's Be Here Now festival with Star. When we ran into Dan, he was courteous and friendly to be sure, but throughout the weekend I saw him only 2 or 3 times. He was not hanging around, nor did he seem to actively pursue conversations with my mother. The few times I did encounter Dan, he was busy doing other things when we walked by him on our way somewhere else. He would ask how we were, as well as how Tim had been. When it came time for Tim to return to his family, we left the Burdock Festival at 3 a.m. to go pick him up. He was sincerely thrilled to be out, of course, and the reunion with his children was beautiful to behold. He was very friendly to me and stretched his legs playing around the park with both of his children, as well as Lacey and Ebony, his pups. When he spoke to Star, it was obvious there was a lot of tension there. As Tim stated in his video, they'd been going through some rough times, so that was to be expected. Shortly after we made it onto the highway to head back, the van broke down. Long story short, we ended up at Tim's mother's house for the next several days. It was clear then that the relationship was only continuing for the sake of Nico and Lila. There were frequent arguments, and I must say, most were one-sided. It was here that I really got my first look at their relationship. One person would bring up something they were unhappy with, yelling would ensue, at which point Tim would typically dominate the conversation, not allowing Star to voice an opinion. Or, alternatively, rewording what she said into something completely different in attempts to play the good guy, bad guy game. When we finally made it back to the Skowhegan area, a mutual friend was gracious enough to take us into his home, although he was reluctant to do so, and soon I learned why. This was my first real look at what other people felt towards them as a pair. I'll use this as an example, as it is a perfect one. What I saw and felt here is typical of what I witnessed throughout the next 6 months. The lone vidiot, or Dan, posted this as a comment on Tim's video. Mutual friends we have told me how they didn't want to even go over to your house anymore because of all of the negative energy and stress they felt there. This is a pretty accurate description. The fighting was so constant, this mutual friend was reluctant to put us up. Not surprising, really, as people close to this couple have a way of getting roped in. We then managed to find a trailer to relocate to. As has been stated before, they would not accept dogs. This was not done intentionally. In fact, we had been trying since Burdock to find a rental property that would allow the dogs to be there. Star was at this point still trying to decide between living together as friends and living separately. I should probably add here that Tim was not involved in the search for a place to live. It was Star and I actively looking. Tim would, however, make suggestions of more people whom we might be able to bunk with. When we were first living at the trailer, Tim was staying with another mutual friend. We went to visit once or twice when we could find transportation, and Tim came to visit as often as he could do so. They were at this point recently broken up, and it is true that Tim was making every effort to convince her to try again. There was still regular fighting, but it was about why they should or shouldn't get back together, as opposed to previously just about daily life. Quite some time later, I was able to convince a neighbor to assist us in retrieving the van from up north. It should be noted that this person also allowed us the use of his 18-foot trailer to empty 2 storage units and later to move from the trailer to the house, all without charging us a dime. Once the van was again operational, Star set up shop as a massage therapist / Reiki master above a thrift store downtown, as well as finding a room in the same building where Tim was allowed to stay with the dogs. Side note here, the rent agreed upon for Tim to stay at the church was $50 a week, which Tim agreed to pay from his own funds. After the thrift store closed, I threw in $100, and Star paid the remainder of the back rent, which was, by the way, all of it. He never paid a dime. We continued on in this way for the next few months. Tim was over probably twice a week. He managed to convince my mother to try again. The arguing kicked off full bore as soon as she agreed. It was clear how much promised changes were forthcoming. Once again, she couldn't get a word in, or when she did, her meaning was twisted and spit back at her, making her seem to be the bad guy. But I've carried on long enough. Now you have some backstory. To the point. This second chance didn't last very long, and when it was over, the shit really hit the fan. The thrift store closed down, and we violated the rental agreement we had by having Tim and the dogs live in the trailer. Against my voice objections, I might add. Let me point out here that Tim has a bad back. He has military cots that he sleeps on. So that bit about giving up and sleeping in your own bed, you've almost always slept in your own bed, typically in your own room. There were a lot of sleepless nights during this time. Tim would stay up half the night ranting about this, that, and the other. Star would stay awake because, well, it's hard to sleep through that. And I would stay awake to make sure it didn't get out of hand. Or, more accurately, that Tim didn't try to carry through with his multiple threats. As I mentioned, there were a fair number of them, ranging from running away with the kids, to killing himself, to killing Star, and my personal favorite, I think you'll like this, to committing genocide against the female population, as all of you women out there are apparently just out to hurt Tim Goodblood. You may say it's normal to say things that you don't mean when you're hurt, Tim, but this goes above and beyond that. Threatening to inflict physical damage to your partner is inexcusable. Let's not talk about committing genocide against the females of the planet. When Star learned of an old farmhouse for rent / sale from one of her clients, she pursued it. This was before the thrift store closed, and yes, they did like Tim, or at least the face Tim shows to the world. We did indeed end up moving in, and Tim set up his shop in the master bedroom. I had my own room, and Mom shared a room with the kids. Tim rarely came out of his room, though. When he did, it was to pick a fight, ask for sexual favors, or to return one of the kids that wandered into his room and interfered with his plant whisperer videos. Half the time, I barely even knew he was there. That's a pretty common scene from what I've witnessed. Those that know Tim, how often did he watch the kids so Star could go do something she wanted to? Periodically, I'll admit. Now how often did Star take the kids so Tim could go do what he wanted to do? All the damn time, right? Star did at one point get a job working as an in-home care specialist. It was only a handful of hours daily, Monday through Friday, but it was a big step. Tim watched the kids while she was away. This sounds pretty good, right? Now let me describe a scenario. Star leaves for work. Tim is out and about watching the kids. I go into the makeshift kitchen to grab a bite to eat, and all of a sudden, I'm watching the kids. Tim is in his room, with the door closed. Nico knocks on Tim's door at one point. He's allowed in for a few minutes before he gets chased out again. I'm still watching the kids. 3 hours later, and about 15 minutes before Star is due home from work, Tim comes out and takes over watching the kids, who are asleep by that point. When Star returns home, she is informed by Tim that they played for a while and then went down for a nap. He never actually says he was there for it, but it was implied. This is not an uncommon occurrence. If there is someone around to take care of his kids, Tim vanishes, wrapped up in his Plant Whisperer videos or whatever else strikes his fancy. When he's actually watching his kids, he's great. He really is. But if he can get out of it, he will. Above this, while Star was trying to keep the kids out of the arguments, Tim was doing the exact opposite. Nico, Daddy's just upset because Mommy doesn't love him anymore. Out of the blue, he just comes up with that in the kitchen. Okay, personal feelings coming through. What the hell's wrong with you, man? Here's another one. Tim's walking around carrying Lila. Then he sees Star and voices, rather loudly, that he shouldn't get too close to Lila because women are all blood-sucking fiends. Every woman he gets close to just ends up hurting him. At which point, he sets her down. Your own daughter, man. What little respect I had for you, Tim, was lost right there. Can you deny that this happened? Go ahead, try. Not that you really needed to hear this from me. His own video proves it. The kids are there with him while he's calling their mother a psychotic bitch and a sleaze. Good work, Tim. Way to show the world how you involve your children in your relationship problems. In terms of why she had a cop with a bogus protection order remove you from the premises of your home, well, if I had to guess, it may have had something to do with you threatening to kill her. Again. Along with anyone she ever decided to form a relationship with. Gotta say, I'd probably do the same in her shoes. Oh, and by the way, when she was on her way to New Hampshire to bed down with Dan, she was sleeping on the couch at her mother's house. I don't think there was much in terms of sexual activity occurring, but that's just speculation. And Tim, you make it sound so horrible when you say Dan told you he didn't approve of the way you were supporting your family. Well, that's because you aren't. The state supports you. And your family. Unless I'm mistaken, your income boils down to what you get from this Plant Whisperer business, which, as you've quoted, has brought in less than $5,000 over the last 6 years. While I was there, I remained neutral. You can ask either of them, or anyone else that was around. When arguments came up, I typically left, and when I could, I took the kids with me. So there is a lot that I can't say for sure happened. Everything I've said in this video, however, I'd swear to. I'd also like to say that by this time it was right around March. Notice I've mentioned Dan only once? That's because Dan was not part of any of my experiences while I was there, aside from the one time that I did mention. Another encounter. Though I wasn't here for this one, I heard about it from a reliable source, that being my grandmother. Not Star's mother, mind you, but my father's mother. She was assisting them in moving from one place to another. Star was several months pregnant with Nico at the time, and carrying a pile of Tim's clothes into the house. Tim was walking ahead of her, empty-handed of course, when he saw that she was struggling with the load she was carrying. Instead of offering to help, he merely said, "Work smarter, not harder." My grandmother frequently recounts this story and says that were it not for the respect she has for Star, she would have decked him. That being said, does anyone really think they plotted against him? Or did Tim push Star away all by himself? Now, to finish this up, Tim, you mentioned in your video that Star wouldn't make any time for you intimately. Can you blame her? When you weren't hibernating in your room and avoiding all contact with her, you were either screaming at her or asking her to suck your cock or to ride your meat stick. First off, that's disturbing, and I suggest seeking professional help. Secondly, coming out of your room to rub your boner against her leg and asking if that excites her? That's something else. That's kind of pathetic, really. That's just sad, dude. Ah well. See ya, Tim.